Why does your Earth guest carry a human duffel into a secure war chamber? Scoffed the towering, crimson-skinned General Voric, his voice dripping with ridicule as he gestured toward the bag. The room of generals burst into snickering laughter, some thumping their armrests in amusement. The human in question, seated at the far end of the chamber, didn't flinch. He simply looked up, his eyes calm, and replied with a dry grin. Because you'll want to see what's in it, after. The laughter died a little too quickly. Something about the way he said, after, made the hairless ones shift uneasily in their polished armor. No rank. No insignia. Just a scruffy, unarmed man with a bag that thudded heavier than it looked. They called it Obsidian Station, a neutral site orbiting a dying star where peace treaties were forged in ash and blood. Built by the Galactic Alliance centuries ago, it had hosted species from over 67 systems, and not one of them had ever thought Earth worth inviting to the negotiation floor. Until now. No one knew exactly who ordered the invitation, but Earth sent someone. Not a general. Not a politician. Just a man with no medals, no titles, and a half-smile that annoyed every decorated officer in the room. His name was Jace Holloway. According to the registry, he was listed simply as guest observer. But the bag, always that worn, olive-drab duffel, was never more than 2 feet from him. It sat beside his chair like a loyal dog, and even the scanning drones that swept every being on entry refused to beep near it. Classified, apparently. The council room had its own gravity field, and its own etiquette. The seat assigned to Jace was a pointed insult, short-legged, backless, and positioned 2 steps lower than the platform of the real delegates. They had meant to humiliate Earth, a planet they still referred to as pre-threshold. He didn't seem to notice. In fact, when one of the aides offered to replace the chair with something more ergonomic, Jace had replied, "Nah, keeps the blood angry. Makes it easier to stay awake." He was sipping something that steamed with a faint cinnamon smell and chatting with an amused translator droid about Earth's breakfast rituals when General Voric had made the comment about his bag. The first full laugh came from General Lakshur of the Brakhtari, whose species had fought Earth in 3 skirmishes and lost 2. "Maybe it's his laundry," he said, voice buzzing like static. "Humans are always shedding fluids. Disgusting biology." The room cackled, except for one general, the thin, pale-eyed Vemkras, who watched Jace too intently for comfort. Jace caught that look, raised his cup slightly, and smiled. Kras didn't smile back. The Galactic Alliance's High Speaker, an AI encased in translucent blue crystal, opened the floor for introductions. Each general gave a long-winded summary of their campaigns and honors. Dozens of worlds, fleets, titles. When it came to Jace, there was a pause. The speaker hesitated. Then, flatly, "Earth guest. No rank. No affiliation." Another round of amused glances rippled through the room. One of the aides coughed to hide a chuckle. Jace stood slowly, stretching a bit, his spine cracking audibly in the chamber's stillness. "Name's Jace Holloway. Earth, obviously. Background in logistics. Technically. I suppose I'm here to observe. You know, keep notes. Draw doodles. Real important stuff." He looked around the room. "But I guess I'm also here to ask a question. Just one." He paused. "Does the name Admiral Kezran mean anything to you?" The silence that followed was sudden and brutal. You could feel it, thick in the air like frost. A few generals shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat, awkwardly. The High Speaker tilted slightly, its crystal form humming erratically. Lakshur's smirk faltered. Voric frowned. "I take it that's a no?" Jace said casually. "Funny. Because on Earth, that name is carved into stone. Right under the title "The Day We Learn How to End a War Before It Starts." A soft tone rang out. The aide monitoring the chamber feeds tapped rapidly at his console. Suddenly, a hologram flickered to life beside Jace, showing a grainy image of a battlefield long denied by the Alliance. A forest turned to glass. Ships in orbit turned belly up and burning. And in the center, a figure in human combat armor walking through the ash. The image vanished as quickly as it came. The speaker AI attempted to regain control. That footage is not authorized. Source unknown. Please cease all unauthorized displays. Sorry, Jace said. Must have been my coffee cup interfering with your feed. Happens a lot. Voric slammed his fist on the armrest. Enough. This is a peace summit, not a stage for primitive bluffing. That bag of yours may be full of ashes for all we know. Jace's expression didn't change. Close. The room stared. Close to ashes, he clarified. But not quite. There's a difference between dust and evidence. You'll see. Later. He sat down again, slowly, like someone in no hurry. Like a man who'd already won but hadn't told the room yet. His hand rested gently on the duffel's strap. And suddenly, the jokes didn't come as quickly. The laughter faded, replaced by uncertain glances and quiet recalculations. Behind him, on a secondary screen, a small alert began blinking silently. An unauthorized data packet was being accessed from an external source. The aide looked nervous but said nothing. Meanwhile, then Crass leaned forward, his voice low. You shouldn't know that name. That record was sealed. Classified beyond protocol. I know a lot of names, Jace said, not turning. Especially the ones who tried to erase mine. And in the hallway just outside the chamber, a cleaning drone passed by the guards. Inside its shell, it carried something ancient, something smuggled aboard with Earth's blessing and hidden in plain sight. An encrypted beacon. And a very short timer. Back inside, Jace looked up at the galaxy's most powerful war council and said, I didn't come here to fight. I came here to remind you what you've forgotten. Or tried to. He took another sip from his cup, exhaled contentedly, then nodded toward the bag. And if I were you, I wouldn't open it until I leave. Asked ChatGPT. The corridor outside the council chamber buzzed with controlled chaos. Aides whispered into comms, analysts scanned data for any mention of the name Jace had dropped, and across sectors, warning algorithms blinked quietly to life. Inside a locked archive room 2 levels below, a low-level intelligence officer stared in stunned silence at a decrypted file that should not have existed. The name Admiral Kezran was buried deeper than any Black Ops file in Alliance history, and yet here it was, blinking in bold letters on his screen, with a timestamp marked 2 minutes after the Earth guest spoke it aloud. The file had no traditional access path. It had appeared, as if summoned, from a ghost server thought destroyed. The contents were horrifying. Images of orbital strikes, gas clouds turning red with vaporized metal, entire planetary installations evaporated without warning. Every trace of the operation had been hidden after the war. Earth had been listed as an observer species at the time. According to all official records, they had no capability to retaliate. Yet the file ended with a single word stamped in red across a body count report. Holloway. The aide's fingers trembled as he accessed the personnel file. The system hesitated, flickering as if rejecting the request, but then it relented. Jace Holloway. Declared killed in action 21 years ago during a pirate ambush in the Galvan Drift. No remains recovered. No last transmission. Just a tactical AI log cut mid-sentence, and a funeral held without a body. The operation he was listed under was known as Hollow Sky. The aide searched for more, but the screen froze, then went dark. A second later, the room lights blinked out for half a second. When they returned, his access was locked. He stared at the screen, sweating, then slowly reached for the emergency communicator to report an anomaly. But it was already active. The voice on the other end spoke first. You didn't see anything. Return to your desk. Back in the council chamber, the mood had shifted noticeably. The laughter was gone. The smug confidence had dulled, replaced by the brittle calm of generals pretending not to be rattled. General Voric maintained his scowl, but his eyes flicked toward Jace's bag more than once. General Crass had gone silent entirely, fingers interlocked as he stared at the table's surface. Jace was no longer sipping coffee. He was just waiting, arms crossed, as if he had nothing to prove and all the time in the galaxy. The bag hadn't moved. not a twitch. But the weight of it now pressed on everyone in the room, like a loaded weapon on a dinner table. On the far end of the chamber, a young alien aide named Tyron had quietly exited. Unlike the others, he was new to the council. Young, curious, and dangerously smart. He had a hunch, one born from stories told in hushed tones by veterans of old conflicts, stories that included unmarked humans who appeared before a battlefield and vanished before the fighting started. Tyron made his way into the auxiliary records department, slicing his own access badge to reach a deeper archive. He keyed in the word Holloway and found a list of redacted entries. He bypassed the first few firewalls, ducking under alerts with quick command overrides. A string of file names appeared. Most were fragmented, but one was intact. He opened it. The screen showed a satellite image. Planet designation D96. The footage was 22 years old. The image zoomed in on a colony base built by the Voric Confederacy, now extinct. The footage showed life, operations, ships docking. Then the screen flickered and cut to the aftermath. The colony cratered. No survivors. Melted steel bones of buildings jutted from blackened earth. The timestamp on the footage was from the same day Admiral Kuzrin had gone missing. The footage cut again. This time to a single still image. A man in charred armor, carrying what looked like a duffel bag. The same one. Tyron stared, his mouth dry. He downloaded a frame and overlaid it with a current image of Jace taken hours earlier from the Council's surveillance cams. The facial match came back 98%. The only differences were age and a longer scar across the cheek. Tyron opened a secure channel to his superior. The voice that answered was not the one he expected. "You've gone too far, Officer Tyron. Return to your assigned duties." The channel closed. His screen locked. Then the entire console shut off. He stood there, the silence pressing around him, realizing something bigger was unfolding than he could understand. Meanwhile, Jace was engaged in light conversation with the Crystal Speaker AI, which appeared flustered by the sudden influx of off-record data being accessed on station systems. The AI, programmed for decorum and order, struggled to address him without reference titles. When Jace offered to just be called "that Earth guy," the AI reluctantly agreed. A few aides snorted behind their hands. But no one else laughed. General Voric finally spoke. "Guest Holloway, are you attempting to intimidate the Council with ghost stories and unauthorized data leaks? If so, this performance ends now. You may have frightened a few analysts, but nothing you've said has changed the standing of your planet or your species. You remain irrelevant to this alliance." Jace tilted his head. "That's the problem with relevance. It shifts fast." He uncrossed his arms and opened a small zipper on the side of the duffel. The sound was quiet but seemed deafening in the stillness of the chamber. He reached inside and pulled out a small metallic coin. It was old, dented, and marked with an insignia that several of the older generals immediately recognized. A field token from a defunct mercenary guild used during planetary sieges. He tossed it on the table. It spun once and landed flat. "That came from a battlefield on Typhus V," Jace said. 378 bodies. No survivors. That was your work, General Voric, if I'm not mistaken. I got there 30 minutes after your bombers left. You forgot to disable the surface recorders. I didn't. Voric surged to his feet, but no one followed. No one defended him. In fact, most generals now leaned subtly away from him. Jace smiled faintly. "You know the funny part? You all thought Earth was quiet because we were weak. You thought we stayed out of your wars because we feared you. But it was never fear. It was patience. And a long memory." From the bag, he retrieved a thin data rod and placed it on the table beside the coin. A few aides stepped forward to retrieve it, but he waved them back. "That one stays here unopened. For now. Consider it a placeholder for what else I have. You open it without consent, and I activate every orbital relay Earth still has within reach of this station. And I promise you, that reach is longer than you think." There was no boasting in his tone. No threat. Just a cold, quiet promise. In the hallway beyond, another small cleaning drone hummed past. But this one did not clean. Its eye flickered red for just half a second, and its path shifted. It began circling the council chamber's outer corridor, mapping, listening, recording. Inside, the bag sat quietly. Zipped again. Untouched. But no one in the room could look at it without imagining what else might be inside. The data rod sat untouched at the center of the council table, a sliver of cold metal that now held the attention of beings who had once commanded entire armadas without flinching. The council chamber, once echoing with arrogance and mockery, now pulsed with a strained silence, the kind that precedes decisions made in fear rather than authority. Jace Holloway leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, eyes drifting slowly over each face. No movement escaped his attention. Every nervous glance, every micro-gesture, every twitch of discomfort was logged in that sharp, unreadable mind. He hadn't said a word in 10 minutes, and yet his presence pressed on them like gravity. The bag sat by his side, as silent and imposing as before, but now it wasn't just a curiosity. Now it was a question none of them wanted answered too soon. Elsewhere aboard Obsidian Station, the young aide Tyron had not returned to his post. He sat in a secondary maintenance conduit chamber, crouched in the dark beside a broken data relay. His personal pad flickered dimly, running a silent routine of visual pattern matching against the galactic archive. He was searching for more. More missions, more images, more proof. His gut told him that Jace had not just appeared after years of silence. He had not just come with a grudge. He had come with a strategy. And Tyron was starting to believe that Earth's guest was far more dangerous than anyone had guessed. The new search results blinked onto his screen. Planet D96. The Eaton Moon. Colony Asterhold. Then the red-marked word returned again. Holloway. D96 had been a minor colony world, strategically unimportant by most standards. No significant military presence, no valuable minerals, just a population of research scientists working under peaceful terms. It had been wiped from the star maps a decade ago, attributed to a reactor breach. But the report had odd inconsistencies. The reactors were fusion-stabilized and designed with six-fold redundancy. Even under sabotage, such a failure should have left at least a warning beacon. There had been none. Tyron examined the old satellite pass data. There, just before the loss of contact, was a fragment of visual static. He processed it with enhanced imaging. A human figure in low orbit drop gear descending toward the surface. Not a team. Just one. He magnified the shape. The outline of a duffel flapped against the drop suit's leg. The deeper Tyron searched, the more fractured the records became. He found dozens of anomalies scattered across old war zones. Places where no official Earth presence had ever been declared, but where the aftermaths always bore the same signature. Quick strikes. Infrastructure spared. Leadership decapitated. Civilian lives protected whenever possible. Operations too clean to be chance, too surgical to be random. Patterns repeated across 5 systems. Always just after an atrocity. Always after the name of a general or admiral disappeared from public record. And in 2 instances, the recovered fragments of helmet cam footage showed the same man standing amid the rubble, never engaging in conversation, never broadcasting his presence. Just walking. Watching. Recording. Back in the council chamber, the high-speaker AI finally broke the silence with a calculated query. Earth guest Holloway, would you be willing to provide a summary of your intended objective within this assembly? The question was careful, too careful, and laced with formality. Jace blinked, then shrugged slightly. I came to observe. Technically. But mostly I came to listen. And then to remind? Remind you of what happens when arrogance becomes policy and history is rewritten by the loudest victors. General Crass spoke then, for the first time in over half an hour. His voice was softer than usual, less certain. Your accusations suggest Earth has been conducting unauthorized operations within galactic territory. If such claims were substantiated, they would represent a serious breach of treaty. Jace leaned forward just enough to cast a shadow over the table. That's the funny part, General. There is no treaty. Not for us. We were never allowed into your alliance. No formal recognition. No shared records. Earth was left on the edge of your empire like a forgotten farmstead next to a burning city. You expected us to stay quiet, stay obedient, stay small. Crass did not respond immediately. But the tension in his shoulders made it clear that the words had struck deeper than anyone wanted to admit. General Voric, ever the loudest voice in the room, attempted to pivot. You speak of forgotten history, guessed Holloway, but Earth itself has remained largely irrelevant in galactic affairs. You possess no fleet, no advanced AI, no teleportation relay. And yet you posture as if holding the galaxy hostage with one bag and some old tokens. Jace gave a slow nod. Exactly. And that should terrify you. Because you've forgotten that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who shouts and marches but the one who studies in silence and waits for the right moment. You forget that Earth is a place that builds quietly and forgives slowly. And when forgiveness runs out, we do not raise armies. We send one. Several aides flinched. One of them finally mustered the nerve to speak. Sir, if I may ask, what exactly is in the bag? Jace looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, not kindly. It's not a threat. It's a mirror. And when you look inside, you'll see every secret you thought buried staring back at you. From one of the corners of the chamber, a data feed console chirped softly. Someone had tried to access restricted council records and failed. Another chirp followed. Then another. Dozens of attempts were being logged and flagged. Someone, somewhere on the station, was scraping the archives. The council aides began whispering nervously. The high-speaker AI tilted its core glow slightly toward the screen, internal systems whirring in confusion. It would take minutes to track the breach source. Maybe hours. Jace sat still. He hadn't moved. He hadn't so much as blinked during the alert. But somehow, everyone in the room knew it was connected to him. Somehow, they all knew he didn't need to hack the system. He just needed to be present. Like gravity. Like consequence. Finally, he stood up and walked around the council table slowly. Not pacing. Not threatening. Just observing. The way a man walks the edge of a canyon to check where the rocks might give. He paused behind General Voric, placing a small coin next to his shoulder on the table. Voric looked at it but didn't touch it. Jace continued walking until he stood behind Crass. A thin shard of transparent material slid from his sleeve. He placed it gently beside Crass's hand. You were the only one who tried to pull the plug on Kezran's campaign. That's why you're still sitting here. I figured you deserved to know the truth. The rest of them just deserve the consequences. And then he returned to his seat, dropped into it casually, and crossed one ankle over his knee like nothing had happened. The bag, still unopened, still ominously mundane, remained right where it had always been. But now, no one could look at it without feeling the weight of unseen evidence, of history clawing back through sealed files and dead systems. In one of the dark conduits below the station, Tyron's screen blinked off one final time. Then a new message appeared unsigned. Stop digging. You're either on the right side of history now, or you're buried with the rest. Choose fast. The council chamber no longer felt like the seat of galactic power. It felt like a waiting room outside a locked door, a door none of them wanted open but all were now staring at in their minds. The bag had become more than just a symbol, or a prop in some quiet psychological operation. It was a gravitational force around which every fear, every buried action, and every political lie now orbited. The council members no longer spoke freely. The usual posturing and long-winded boasts were gone. Even General Voric had quieted, though his jaw clenched tighter with each passing minute. The data rod still sat untouched in the center of the table, and despite all their curiosity, none had dared to reach for it. That hesitation alone told Jace everything he needed to know. They were breaking apart without a single shot being fired. He sat there, unmoving, his hands resting on the arms of the ridiculous child-sized chair they had originally chosen to humiliate him. That insult now felt like a curse on the room, an echo of arrogance that kept coming back to mock them instead. Far beneath the station's surface, Tyron stood alone in the silence of a data filtration hub, staring at the reflection of his own face on the now-dead screen. The warning had been clear. Stop digging. But curiosity was a poison, and his mind could not forget what it had seen. It was not just the incidents. It was the precision. The pattern. The method. Entire planetary crimes buried and repainted with a brush of war propaganda. Earth had never officially responded, never made public statements, never threatened retaliation. And yet the timing of every disaster, every disappearance, every anomalous attack had matched perfectly with the trail Jace Holloway now followed. And that was what terrified Tyron most. Not the actions themselves, but the patience. The utter patience to wait decades, gather evidence, and then step into the lion's den without blinking. Up in the chamber, General Crass finally broke the silence again, this time addressing the AI speaker. He requested that a full internal investigation be launched regarding the legitimacy of the footage and claims presented thus far. The AI acknowledged the request with a glowing pulse and began coordinating with the station's secure servers. Jace did not interrupt. He allowed them to move at their own pace, allowed the systems to spin their gears while the truth waited in his bag like an executioner sipping tea. When Crass glanced at him as if expecting a reaction, Jace only nodded faintly, as if granting permission for them to discover what they had tried to forget. The feed screens lining the chamber's walls suddenly shifted. Without warning, a live feed began to play. It was an external channel, not one of the secure internal briefings. It had somehow overridden the Council's feed authority. The footage began with a planetary timestamp. The camera shook slightly as it zoomed in on a convoy of military transports hovering over a field camp. Dozens of alien scientists huddled near makeshift shelters, waving frantically as explosions lit the sky in the background. Over the next few seconds, the feed cut between views. Military personnel giving orders, an orbital cannon misfiring, and then a massive firestorm rolling across the outpost. The footage jumped again, this time to after the bombardment. Dust and ash filled the frame. Scattered remains. Silence. Then, through the smoke, a single figure walking, slowly, toward the wreckage. A human. Same frame, same armor pattern, same gait. The duffel bag was in his left hand. His right hand carried a small beacon. As he passed the half-buried camera drone, the system automatically triggered a face ID. Jace Holloway. Logged. D96. Footage ended. The chamber erupted into chaos. Several aides scrambled to their consoles, trying to regain control of the feed. The high-speaker AI flickered erratically, attempting to suppress the transmission. General Voric stood again, voice raised in protest, demanding to know how such footage had been leaked. Crass asked for an emergency lockdown of all communication nodes. But the feed had already been broadcast across 50 systems. The encryption watermark on the video confirmed its source. Earth. More specifically, it had come from a data burst satellite that no longer existed on official records. A ghost node, hidden and activated only by proximity to Alliance relay networks. And now it had fed the galaxy a truth too large to ignore. Jace watched the panic with a quiet stillness. He reached into the bag again, this time slower, letting every eye follow the motion. He pulled out a simple crystal, flat and palm-sized. It glowed with a gentle blue light. He placed it next to the data rod and spoke clearly for the room to hear. That contains the complete timeline of your cover-up operations on 6 separate colony worlds. 39 named officials involved in direct authorization of force removals, weaponized biodisplacement, and illegal atmospheric testing. I've got more. This is just a taste. He gestured toward the bag without looking. If you want to know what else is in there, just keep lying. The AI speaker tried to interject, but Jace raised a hand and it fell silent. I didn't come here for revenge, he said quietly. I came here to give you a choice. You can pretend none of this happened. You can smear me. Call this manufactured. But the footage is already out there. The packet replicates every 30 minutes across civilian news networks and data vaults. You cannot contain this anymore. The galaxy knows. General Voric stepped forward again, though now his voice had lost its confidence. This is blackmail. You're using illegal data to extort the Council. Jace gave a short laugh. No. Blackmail would mean I want something from you. I don't. You already made your choice years ago. This is just me letting the universe know who you really are. The aides began receiving pings from their personal communicators. System-wide protests were already forming. Civilian fleets were rerouting. One prominent senator had already issued a demand for emergency hearings. Jace's message had been timed with surgical precision. Not just to reveal, but to collapse the facade. Crass finally sat back down, his hand covering his face. Voric looked at the coin still resting on the table beside him, as if wondering how something so small could carry so much weight. The AI flickered again, announcing that several member races had already called for independent investigations into the footage. Jace took the last sip from his drink, then carefully packed the crystal back into the bag and zipped it halfway. I suggest you begin damage control, he said. Because the next item that leaves this bag will not be words. And believe me, you will not enjoy what comes after. He stood, nodded politely to the room, and walked out without another word. No guard stopped him. No one dared. The doors slid shut behind him with a finality that rang louder than any argument. The room remained frozen, each member lost in thoughts of what had just unfolded, of what had been exposed, and of what else might still be hidden in that damned bag. Jace walked the corridors of Obsidian Station with a calmness that made even the patrolling security units avoid eye contact. None of them had received orders to detain him. No protocols had been updated. The chain of command was frozen, just like the council chamber he had left behind. But Jace knew the real storm was only just beginning. Across the galaxy, systems would already be breaking into chaos. News anchors would be scrambling to verify the footage. Civilian forums would erupt into speculation. Opposition leaders would use the moment to strike. But Jace didn't care about the political collapse. He cared about something smaller, something far more personal. As he reached the lower levels of the station, he entered a quiet lounge that overlooked the dying star around which the station orbited. The glass view was filtered to dim the sun's intensity, turning it into a slow-burning ember in a sea of black. Jace sat alone, placed the bag on the floor beside him, and finally let himself breathe. It had taken him years to reach this moment. Years of silence, of tracking down fragments, of reconstructing a trail deliberately erased by those who had believed their crimes could vanish beneath bureaucracy and war fog. His official mission had ended over 2 decades ago. Hollow Sky was supposed to be a single operation, retaliation for an unprovoked massacre on a remote science outpost. But Jace had arrived late. By the time he touched down, the outpost was gone, reduced to glass and ash. And among the dead were 34 civilians. Scientists, researchers, and medics. One of them had worn a necklace with a tiny engraved stone. Jace had given it to his son just before the boy joined the off-world research unit. That necklace was all they ever found. Jace carried it now, tucked in the smallest pouch of the bag, close to the token that bore his son's ID. No medals had been given. No apologies had come. Earth was told to remain quiet, to not jeopardize its standing by retaliating. So Earth obeyed. But Jace did not. He left the service, vanished off every official registry, and began gathering. Not weapons, not troops. Information. Hidden transmissions, battlefield echoes, encrypted records from ships that had mysteriously never returned. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of the rot within the Alliance's core. They had not simply made mistakes. They had orchestrated tragedies, silenced the victims, and blamed pirates or rogue factions. The outpost that had taken his son was one of many. Jace had spent the years since then dismantling the illusion, piece by piece. But he had never spoken publicly. Never released any of the evidence. Not until now. Because now, after all the pain and patience, he had found a stage large enough, and a bag full enough. The door behind him slid open quietly, and Jace didn't look. He already knew who it would be. Tyron stepped in slowly, unsure if he was allowed to be there, but unable to stay away. Jace gestured to the seat beside him without turning his head. The young aide sat down. They watched the star together in silence for a long moment. Then Tyron spoke in a low voice. I saw the logs. The real ones? The pattern, the missions. The timelines. You've been in the shadows for decades. Jace nodded once. You were persistent. Most would have stopped after the first warning. Tyron hesitated. Why now? Why reveal it all here? You could have leaked the data from anywhere. Jace finally turned his head and looked at him. Because they needed to see my face. The ones who laughed when they thought we had nothing. The ones who signed those orders and then moved on like they didn't just erase lives. They needed to see that a man survived it. That someone was willing to come back and show them the cost. Tyron looked down at the bag. What's left in there? Jace looked back at the star. Enough. Enough to finish what I started. Enough to keep them honest, or terrified, or both. Tyron leaned back, uncertain. You think this will change anything? Jace didn't answer right away. Then he said slowly, it's not about change. It's about memory. You don't let people forget what they've done. Not when they wear medals for it. The silence returned between them. Far above, new security alerts rippled through the upper decks of the station. One of the generals had collapsed in a meeting, another had fled their quarters under false ID, and a third had sent encrypted messages off-station just before communications began to jam. Panic was blooming in slow waves. The illusion of order was cracking under its own hypocrisy. In systems where the footage had been verified, civilian pressure had already sparked resignations. Jace had not asked for that. He had simply let the truth breathe. Back in the chamber, the AI speaker processed a new directive from an emergency council meeting. They intended to declare Jace a rogue agent and disavow all evidence as fabrications. But every attempt to erase the feed was met with an error. The footage had already been copied by independent nodes. The message had transcended the source. And worse, new files were appearing. Anonymous dumps signed only with one phrase. From the bag. The council scrambled to regain control. But there was none. Their words rang hollow, because they had already been caught. Not by a bomb. Not by a fleet. But by one man with a bag of receipts. Tyron stood, looking uneasy. What are you going to do now? Jace picked up the bag and slung it over his shoulder. I've got one more thing to deliver. Tyron stepped aside. Do you need help? Jace gave him a faint smile. No. You've done enough. But if they come for you, say you never knew what was inside. That might save your life. Tyron hesitated, then nodded. Jace walked past him, the bag heavy but balanced. Down another corridor, to another sealed room, where the final item inside waited to be dropped. There was no ceremony. No final speech. Just one man and the truth he refused to bury. And a galaxy now forced to look at itself in the mirror he had unzipped. Jace stepped into the last chamber, a place not listed on any of Obsidian Station's public maps. It was an old diplomatic vault, unused for decades, its lights dimmed, its access door rusted around the seals. Only the station's original architects had known its purpose, and Jace had acquired its access code from a source that no longer existed in any system. The room was circular, with walls designed to absorb sound and light, a place built for off-record confessions between leaders too powerful to be caught telling the truth. It had no cameras. No surveillance. It was the only place on the station where honesty could exist without consequences. Jace placed the bag on the table at the center and sat down in the lone chair opposite a blank wall. Then he waited. He knew they would come. Not all of them. Just one. The one who still thought salvaging the Alliance's image was possible. The one who believed that covering the wound might still be better than treating it. 10 minutes passed before the door opened with a reluctant hiss. General Crass entered alone, no guards, no aides. His uniform was less rigid now, his eyes lined with a sleepless desperation that made him seem older. He approached the table and sat across from Jace in silence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Crass finally broke the quiet with a question he hadn't dared to ask earlier. Why did you really come here? Jace looked at him, the weariness in his gaze making the words heavier than steel. I came to bury someone. Crass leaned back slightly. Who? Jace opened the bag one last time. From inside, he pulled out a small box, made of old earth steel, dented, scorched, and sealed by hand. He set it down on the table and tapped the lid gently. My son. His name was Theo. 19. Assigned to a science post with full diplomatic protections. He was there to study atmospheric shifts on newly terraformed planets. They told us it was safe. They told us he'd be helping make alien worlds livable. Then you bombed the outpost. Crass's face tightened. I didn't give that order. Jace nodded. I know. You tried to stop it. The record shows that. That's why I didn't put your name in the first data dump. Crass looked at the box, then at Jace, struggling to form words. I'm sorry. Jace didn't react. Sorry doesn't bring back the unburned. He slid the box closer to Crass. You want to save the Alliance? You want to preserve its future? Then take that box into the main council chamber, and open it in front of every delegate. Say his name. Read his record. Say it was your failure. Say you allowed it. Say you should have died instead. That's the price of keeping this galaxy from eating itself alive. Crass stared at him, aghast. You expect me to ruin myself on live feed? Jace's voice was cold. No. I expect you to tell the truth for once in your life. If you won't, the last thing inside this bag will do it for you. Crass's eyes flicked toward the still open duffel. What's left in there? Jace pulled out the final item. It was a transmitter, black and worn, marked with a code that no living council member would recognize. He set it next to the box. That's connected to an old network. An Earth fleet. Not warships. Witness ships. Built to record and broadcast. They're not here to fight. They're here to watch. If I press that button, the entire archive goes live. Every document. Every name. Every date. Every lie. And they'll do it while orbiting the planets your alliance claims to protect. They won't fire. They'll just show the truth. Everywhere. Forever. Crass's hands trembled as he reached for the box. He held it for a long time before standing. I don't know if I'm brave enough. Jace looked at him, his voice flat. Then find someone who is. Crass left the room without another word, the box held tightly to his chest. Jace watched him go, then sat back down, the weight of what he had carried for so long finally easing from his shoulders. For the first time in decades, the bag felt light. Above them, the council chamber was in chaos. Half the generals had abandoned their posts. Civilian representatives were demanding immediate reorganization of the Alliance's charter. Some races had already declared independence from the central government. Rumors of mutiny stirred in distant sectors. But when General Crass stepped into the chamber holding the small steel box, silence fell again. He walked to the center table, placed the box on the surface, and pressed a single button that broadcasted to every station monitor. Delegates leaned forward. Soldiers froze mid-command. Civilians tuned in, unsure of what was happening. Crass looked into the camera and began to speak. He told them about Theo. He read the mission log. He named the officers who had authorized the bombing. He read the casualties slowly. He admitted he had tried to stop the strike but had failed. Then he opened the box and showed the ID chip. The engraved stone. The ashes. No one interrupted. No one dared. The transmission echoed across sectors. Some wept. Some shouted. Some turned away. But none could deny it. The galaxy had changed. Back in the vault, Jace stood slowly. The bag was nearly empty now. Only one item remained, hidden in a side pocket. He reached inside and pulled out the necklace, its stones still warm from his hand. He placed it on the table and left it there. Then he walked out of the room, his steps steady, his path clear. As he reached the station's main hangar, a single drone followed him. It belonged to Earth's Shadow Fleet. No weapons. Just cameras. It hovered silently, recording the moment. Jace stopped at the ramp of a waiting shuttle, looked back once, and gave a nod. Then he disappeared inside. The shuttle lifted, engines humming gently, and drifted into space without fanfare. In the chamber, the transmission ended. The delegates sat in stunned silence. Kras stood alone. The box remained open. The galaxy watched. And above them, in silent orbit, Earth's witness fleet waited with eyes unblinking, daring the galaxy to forget again. But this time, the bag was empty. And the truth had been dropped at their feet.